welcome to True Crime with me, Emma Kenny. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate it deeply. If you are not a subscriber yet, but you have found my channel, make sure that you take a moment to subscribe if you enjoy what you see. If you're a returning customer and you haven't subscribed yet, press the button now. Immediately. And if you are a returning person who does subscribe, thank you very much for your support. You know I adore you and I am incredibly grateful for all that you do by just being here with me. Also, thank you to all my Patreon fans. You're awesome. It's meaning that I can up the ante on content production. And also exciting news, we're going to have merch soon, which is really interesting journey-wise for us because we're doing it ourselves. So we could have gone somewhere else to do it. We could have paid somebody else to do it, but we've decided that we want to have design interests ourselves. So if you want it, it will be available at some point. And also, tell me the kind of things that you want, because then I'll be able to make sure that we deliver. Today, I'm going to be covering a case that is quite controversial regarding the results of the trial and then the subsequent appeals. I'm interested to know your thoughts on this, because often when it comes down to sentences, there is some controversy over the fact that females at times are given sentences that are really harsh because they are female. But in this case, you may disagree and think that the individual who got the sentence deserved it. And finally, if you are here and you have just arrived and you like crime and you like consistency, then I am your woman. On a Wednesday and a Sunday every single week, regardless of the weather, regardless of any supernatural events, regardless of wherever I am, there will be content released. So if you like crime and consistency, this is the channel for you. Today I'm going to be talking about the murders of Reggie and Carol Sumner. Those murders were carried out, and they were heinous murders, really heinous, by Tiffany Cole. She was 23 at the time. Michael James Jackson, not to be confused with the obvious Michael Jackson, who is a much better dancer than this one. He was 23 at the time. 18-year-old Alan Wade, 18-year-old Bruce Nixon, and they were involved in the murders of 61-year-old James Reggie Sumner and 61-year-old Carol Sumner. The murders happened on the 8th of July 2005, and the location of the murders were Jacksonville, USA. So another USA crime. Don't get me wrong. USA crime is something that I love researching, but we have enough problems of our own in the UK. But you guys, you recommended me to do this, so that's why I'm doing it. All of the lists that I have of these crimes is extensive, but I will get to them eventually. So who was Tiffany Cole? And even though we're going to explore the crime and what happened and the other perpetrators, it is going to centre around her in particular. And there's lots of reasons for that we'll go through as I draw your attention to it. But she was born on the 3rd of December 1981. She grew up in a place called Charleston in South Carolina. And she didn't have the easiest start because her dad was in prison when she was born. David Duncan was her father and he was incarcerated. So she and her mother, Shirley Duncan, lived with her grandmother for quite a long time. So even though there was dysfunction and there were problems in the relationships and obviously with the paternal side of the situation, her grandmother was supportive. Once her dad gets released from prison, it seems like there is quite a lot of instability. So they relocate a lot of times, and any of you will know if you've ever been in a situation as a child where you are moving regularly and often, it means that you can't create roots. And whether we like to think about children's feelings or otherwise, when it comes down to the decisions that we make as parents, it's really pivotal that we understand that consistency and relational bonding and building with peers is really important for children. When you're constantly moving around, you kind of struggle because it will mean school moves, district moves, friends that are there will not be available to you. You're a kid. And the consequence of that is it can really impact on the way that we build relationships. And also, when relationships walk into our lives, we can sometimes attach too much requirement to them because they've been a missing link in our experience. When Tiffany is 5 years of age, she has a sibling, a brother. And what we know about her from reports is that she very much helped to raise him. So for a period of time, the role of almost being a surrogate parent was primary in her experience. Again, she was really young. That should not have been her responsibility. And it unfairly weights a situation for a child where they don't get to have the freedom and opportunity that they should get because they're kids, because essentially they're helping to raise a sibling. That means that her life was unstable. You know, if you look at her overall, her family dynamics were problematic. Her parents also divorced, and then she ends up spending time living with them both. This is normal. We see this quite a lot. A lot of parents have 50-50 responsibility now. But again, it can be really challenging for a kid to have two homes. Look, I am the first person to admit that it's good that people can divorce if they're in unhappy circumstances, but I think we underestimate the impact for lots of children. I'm from a situation where my own relationship with my first partner ended. We got divorced, we had kids. That is not ideal. I can own that it's not ideal. It's more challenging for kids, right? But it's a great thing that we can leave unhappy situations. But let's not underplay the fact that that can be confusing for children. And if they had their wish, they would choose their parents to be together. Her mum, after the divorce, begins a relationship with another guy. He is called Rick, and he becomes her stepfather. And then when Tiffany's 12, she actually gets another stepbrother. So her mum has a baby with Rick. So again, she's got brothers, she's got a new stepfather. There is some kind of at least consistent experience there, but it is still a bit more confusing because she again starts to raise him. And she said when she reports on what childhood was like that she didn't really have one. She never really felt like she had a childhood at all. She felt like she was always the person who was in charge of looking after the babies, which is a heavy responsibility at 12 years of age. Now at school, she didn't stand out, certainly when she was younger, in any negative way. She was a cheerleader, she was in the school band, so they are real positives, aren't they? And I think that part of that is that desire to fit in. And certainly when you think about cheerleaders, and I'm from the UK, we don't really have a lot of cheerleaders here. But nonetheless, when I think about America and I think about cheerleaders, I think the all-American girl, I think really beautiful, I think really popular. They're the kind of stereotypes that I have. And if I'm a girl and I'm seeking that kind of attention, it's because I want to be somebody who fits in. And if you spent a lot of your life moving around, then you're going to want to fit in somewhere. And being popular and fitting that dynamic is something that I think most girls would like if they've got this instability in the background. So everything is okay until she gets to the age that in the UK we would consider as secondary school. So like when they go 11 to 16, and that's when things change. So she's getting good grades. Obviously, retrospectively, teachers said that she was an effective student, but in spite of these good grades, she ends up dropping out of school in the 10th grade. And this is where we kind of see things really become problematic. So at this point, it seems that she gets involved with drug taking, and she takes Xanax, Valium, cocaine. And if you think about that, that's, benzodiazepines, it's anti-anxiety drugs, and it's also stimulants. So there's a hell of a lot going on in her adolescent brain because of the fact that she's taking all of these drugs, and she's also drinking. So when you think about the impact on her, it would be substantial. And it also says something to us, doesn't it? What is somebody of that age doing, taking all of those drugs? What are they trying to escape? What are they trying to self-medicate? What are they trying to manage? What's going on in their world that they are literally turning to these really high-level drugs? And I think about Xanax and the way it's sold as an anti-anxiety and how impactful and effective it can be. But the rebound effect on drugs like that is critical to acknowledge. So if you're taking Xanax for anxiety and it's relaxing you, you come off that stuff, you are going to freak out. Literally, it is going to make you feel like you have never been as anxious in your life. And very often that's why people don't come off these kind of drugs, because they can't manage the after effects of the come down. So you perpetuate that behavior just to manage the way it feels coming off it. And she also is drinking heavily. That personality change is going to be pretty obvious to people around her, because you can't operate in a normal way, and you can't operate personality-wise how you have previously when you're additionalizing all of the things that you're additionalizing in that moment because of these drugs. And this is a young person, you know, we're talking 15 years of age, and she's high on all of this stuff. She also runs away. So when she's 16, she leaves home and goes and lives with her boyfriend. Again, these are critically important decisions to be making, and it shows an impulsivity, a lack of understanding about the reality of the decisions that she's making and the impact that it could have on her life. And it says that she's trying to be a grown-up, doesn't it? And it also means that she feels that she's old enough to deal with these decisions. You know, she's 16, but she feels like this is an acceptable course of behaviour. And again, we have to then bring in, well, if you've been bringing up your kid brothers for years and you've been given all this responsibility, you're going to feel that you're ready for things that you're not. Then she has some really challenging news. In 2005, she finds out that her dad has got a terminal cancer diagnosis. And it shows that caring tenacity within her, that she returns to care for him. And that's what she does. She goes back to care for the man that, in spite of the instability and dysfunction, she loved very much. And there's that core of her, isn't there? Wanting to look after people, even when that causes issues for her. We have to note that, because what I'm going to tell you afterwards about this particular individual's behaviour is at such a juxtaposition to what we're hearing now. It's striking, shocking, and it causes questions about what on earth happened for somebody who's got this loyalty and compassion complex in these moments in time compared to the ruthless murderer that she becomes. Now, her father, when she goes back to care for him, has got these neighbours. And those neighbours are a retired couple called James, Reggie Sumner, and his wife, Carol. They're our victims. Tiffany Cole's dad's really good friends with them. And Reggie and Carol were an unusual couple in the fact that they had essentially been friends at high school, but for whatever reason, they'd lost contact over the years and they'd reconnected. So initially, after serving time in the Navy, Reggie gets married, finds work with the railroad. Carol gets married as well. She has children of her own. And actually, to say that Carol was in a really precarious situation during one of her marriages is an understatement. She actually gets shot several times by her husband, but she manages to survive it. Now, there are 40 years that pass before Reggie and Carol get back in contact with one another. So think about that. This whole lifetime passes, and then all of a sudden, they find themselves in contact again. And they fall in love. And it's quick. This romance blossoms, and they're married within a year. So there is something about that historical connection. I don't know whether any of you recognise that, but I think a lot of us do. When we meet somebody from our past and we have history that's shared, it's often a shortcut, isn't it, to connection? Because you have this memory of this experience in your life, usually that's nostalgic and has meaning, and it buffers the connection, and it can lead to people feeling very comfortable very quickly. And that's exactly what happens with this couple. Now, they know Tiffany Cole, and they know her family really well. In fact, they help her look after her sick father. And I'm going to bring in the fact that this couple are not in good health themselves. So Carol had been diagnosed with liver cancer. She's undergoing treatment, including chemo. She also has hepatitis C, diabetes, and fibromyalgia. So she's in a lot of pain. These are big issues. This is not hypochondria. She is really, really unwell. And the fact that she's dealing with cancer and yet helping another person who's struggling with cancer, which she is, she's helping Tiffany Cole's father, just demonstrates the kind of human being that she is. Because if you can be confronting your own mortality and dealing with your own pain, and fibromyalgia is really painful, let alone all the other things, and then you can help somebody else who's got terminal cancer, it's because you reflect and understand what it is that they're going through, and also see that you can still have a positive impact in spite of your own pain. And we've got to say that to Carol, because she was clearly a really special person. Reggie, her husband, he's also got his battles. He's got chronic diabetes, and let's put that into context. I think when people think about diabetes, a lot of people will think about, oh, well, losing weight will manage it, and it will if it's type 2. But actually, if you have chronic diabetes and you're insulin dependent, these are really critical issues that people face. It's life-threatening. People go into hypo states and they can die. And the fact that you are always literally a moment away from a potential coma is something that really impacts on your mental health and mental wellness. And Reggie also had bones that were brittle. He'd recently broken a leg, and he actually still had an ankle brace on when the crimes that I'm going to talk about were committed. This means that when they met, they had an option. And that option as a couple was to go, this is pretty crappy that we've got all of these things going on. But isn't it amazing how time has brought us back together and how we've managed to find romance and love? We've experienced lives previously that didn't work out, and therefore we value one another more because of that. And they wanted to really make their retirement and the time that they had together mean something really, really important. And that, again, is testament to the human spirit, isn't it? That it doesn't matter how old you are or infirm you are. What matters more than anything is just knowing that you feel safe with that other human being and that they feel safe with you, and that there are adventures still to be had, even when life has essentially given you negative experiences such as ill health. And these two are literally living their best life with each other. And one of the reasons that they actually moved to Jacksonville, which is where Tiffany Cole's father is because they felt that the Florida climate would be better for their health. So they make that decision in 2005 and think, you know what, this is going to be better ultimately for our survival and for our experience together and for our love to grow. And hopefully it will give us longevity in our life, which is a great decision to make and also reflective of where they were. They were living their romance, and it's all to play for still. And the truth is, that couple should have been able to enjoy their retirement as planned. And they would have if they hadn't maintained contact with Tiffany Cole. And Tiffany Cole was an individual that they trusted. They'd even sold her a car. It was a green Chevy Lumina. So when Tiffany Cole buys the car off the couple, she can't afford to pay for it all. So they decide that it's okay that she can go to their new home and she can make monthly payments. And that's how they're going to organise this transaction. They also say, look, you are so welcome to come and stay with us. If you're ever in Jacksonville, our home is open to you. Shows you. They are lovely, compassionate, hospitable people, right? But that absolutely open, hospitable nature is essentially the downfall. Isn't that awful? Isn't it horrific when you think about how vulnerability is often somebody's open heart? Because in this case, if they hadn't invited Tiffany Cole anywhere near them, if they just sold the car and let it be, if they hadn't been willing to be kind, they would still be alive. Now, in May 2005, Tiffany Cole is basically partying with a few friends at Myrtle Beach. Something I would like to be doing right now. Not with Tiffany Cole, not with her friends, just me. I'd just like to be there. Maybe my husband, maybe my kids, not the partying bit. That would not be appropriate. But I'm just saying, when I see Myrtle Beach and partying and a resort on the South Carolina Atlantic coast, I'd rather be there. If anybody can arrange that for me, please leave it in the comments below. But basically when she's there, she meets Michael James Jackson. And it's really romantic. And I think it's really important to acknowledge this because, you know, when you're dealing with murderers, there's often this stereotype about them and we can fail to recognize the humanity in them. And what was amazing about their meeting, it wasn't amazing at all. It was a terrible meeting. It was a meeting that should have given red flags out everywhere because the reason that she met him was because he stole money and drugs from her hotel room. Is it just me? It's like somebody basically burglarizes you and you're like, oh my God, he's definitely got the kind of characteristics that I want in a long-term partner. I should definitely date him. Literally that happened. She's basically dealing drugs, but he robs her. He's 23, she's 23 at the time, probably the only connection, really, on that level. Despite the fact that he has done this, they decide that this is obviously meant to be. I've got drugs, you stole drugs, I'm a criminal, you're a criminal, we should definitely have a relationship. So they basically have this holiday romance and apparently fall in love. Although Jackson, sociopath, so not sure that he's got the capacity for love, but we'll come to that later. It's also worth mentioning that at this point, Tiffany Cole has had a history of dating abusive and dominant men. Jackson, clearly that kind of character, very dodgy. That's my professional opinion, dodgy. Just dodgy. But basically a sociopath, as I said. He's never had a steady job, didn't even have a car at the time, and obviously, as we know, was quite happy to rob somebody that eventually he'd have a romantic relationship in. Bizarre. And they just connect. They have this torrid, passionate few weeks where they're partying and they're getting high, and basically they keep doing that until they run out of cash. So now we have a problem. Obviously, when you want drugs, you need cash. When you've got a partner who's also a dependent, you're going to need more cash. And so it doesn't matter how much you're enjoying the high life, there's going to be a point where it all comes crashing down. And this happens. So in June 2005, it's time to make some changes to the situation. And they go and they meet Jackson's friend. That's 18-year-old Alan Wade. Wade sadly lives in Jacksonville. He's living with his mother at the time, but obviously that brings them to the area that Carol and Reggie live. They also needed to complete the paperwork on Tiffany Cole's car because of the payment situation, and that means that they need to have contact with Carol and Reggie. Now, it's worth noting that Wade's mother really disliked Jackson, really felt that he was a terrible influence on her son, and we can all agree she's gonna be right. Oh yeah, female maternal intuition is never wrong. It's probably sometimes wrong. It probably is sometimes wrong, but not most of the time. I know that a lot of the women who are mothers listening to this will be like, it's never wrong, Emma. It's never wrong. I'm just saying occasionally it might be a bit wrong, right? Because all I'm saying is that sometimes psychopaths are quite charming and you may initially think that they're quite nice. But most of the time, a mother's intuition is A1 as far as I'm concerned. But she feels like he's having a really bad influence on her son. It's as simple as that. So Cole and Jackson end up staying for a couple of days at a hotel in Jacksonville. They've partied really hard. They've ran out of their cash and they decide that they want to spend one more night there. So they need a place to stay. And who are they going to call? They're going to call Reggie and Carol Sumner. Simple as that. They've got a free open invitation to their house. Now, Reggie and Carol at this point are just having a really nice retirement in Jacksonville. They obviously are enjoying each other. They're enjoying their new world together and life's good. So Tiffany Cole doesn't know them very well, but she does know that they offered to put her up, so she may as well call on that favour. And you know what? Carol and Reggie are lovely. Absolutely as we expect them to be. These people who have allowed this woman into their life, sold the car to them and said, look, ever need a place to stay, come and stay in our spare room. And that's what they let her do. They invite Cole and Jackson in, let them stay in the spare room of the new home. And that good deed, that one decision, is their undoing. Simple as that. That one action causes this reaction and this consequence that they absolutely do not deserve. It's harrowing to imagine that these human beings, these good-hearted individuals, can be placed in a situation where they invite murder into their home. And that's what happened. Because during this stay, it seems that Carol starts opening up to Tiffany Cole and says, you know, as many of us would when good things have happened to us, we explain them to people because we feel safe doing so. And Carol says, look, we did really well from our house sale and we've actually made about $100,000, which is something that you should be able to say to anybody. And most people will be like, that is amazing. I hope that I get that in my retirement, you know? But not Tiffany Cole. First thing that she sees and hears are dollar signs. Simple as that. So she goes straight to Jackson and says, listen, these frail, vulnerable people have made $100,000. Now, bear in mind, Jackson is the kind of individual who robs a potential love interest of cocaine and money. So we already know where his mindset is, and it is automatic. He instantly thinks, this is the solution to our money problems. And that's when he starts to plan and plot. It really gets me when I see that kind of classic psychopathic trait, which is, how do I exploit vulnerability? How do I utilize other people's means for my own cause? Because it's such a wolf amongst sheep kind of attitude, isn't it? Most of us would just be deeply grateful for these human beings who've opened their home to us and made us feel that we are welcome. But a psychopath doesn't do that. All they look at is the thread of vulnerability that runs through an individual, and they seek to use it however it will benefit them. And that's exactly what Jackson is plotting in his mind. You know, he looks at the Sumners. They're really unwell. So if he decides to exert power over them, it's not going to be difficult. If he wants to take their money, who is going to stop them? They are frail. They are sick. They're easy targets. What he does realize is he's going to need some help. So again, think about the psychopathic mindset, the sociopathic mindset there. This individual is looking at exploiting them, but that's not enough. To make sure that he gets away with this, he's going to have to enlist other people. The arrogance and superiority of recognizing that you feel that you are an individual who can control other people is very evident in that moment. So not just controlling the Sumners, controlling the individual he's going to bring into the crime. So he decides, I'm going to recruit Wade. Now, Wade and he had known each other for literally around a year. That's hardly any time to build a level of trust that you think you can bring this person in to do something so damning. And when I tell you about the crime, it is absolutely reprehensible and damning. And if anybody with any ounce of conscience heard about it, you would do everything to stop it happening. Isn't the case in this crime, but it is harrowing. Now, in South Carolina, Cole hires a rental car in her name because we all know that a lot of these criminals are very bright. Sorry, is it just me? It's like, it's in your name. If I literally notice your number plate and then go to the hire people, it will be like, it's Tiffany Cole. Here is her detail, you know? But they're never the brightest, are they? With respect. So she hires this silver Mazda RX-8 and then they drive to Wade's home. They have this really vague plot, and that vague plot is basically they're going to rob the Sumners. And Wade is told this and he says, cool, I'm in. So bear in mind at this point, Wade is being told this is going to be a robbery. Because I think it's essential to differentiate between somebody who knows that they're going to an actual murder versus somebody who thinks that they're going to get some cash from a robbery. Because of this, Wade brings a friend of his, Bruce Nixon. He's 18, so he's a kid. And now the scene is set. And this is when things start to spiral, because there's 4 of them involved at this point, and they start hatching this really horrific plan. So whilst we can initially forgive the 2 brought in because they didn't actually know what the crime was going to be, the minute they start talking about this, they are in deep. Because the plan is they're going to abduct the Sumners, they're going to steal the money, and then they're going to kill him. The leap to take from trying to exploit somebody for financial gain and trying to end their lives for financial gain is an unbelievable jump. Now, there's 4 people involved here, and what we know about pack mentality is that it gives a permission base for negative behaviour, and it also reinforces that when others agree. So even if one of you is unsure and 3 of you agree, there is a stronger likelihood that the other person will fold, engage, and carry out as the plan is told to them, because they feel that pressure. But essentially, it isn't a large group of people. So if one is unsure and another's unsure, that should be enough to topple the plan. So they must have all agreed to some degree, whether it's 25%, 50%, 100%. The point is they went ahead with this. And this is where the planning begins. And this crime, with respect, even though they're not sophisticated, this crime is still meticulously planned. And in July 2005, they carry it out. So a couple of days before the murders, Nixon steals 4 shovels. After he's stolen these shovels, the group drive to a really remote area in Charlton County on the Florida-Georgia border. They hike through woods, and then they dig a 4-foot by 6-foot hole. Cole is literally stood with a flashlight at this point. So she's not digging the hole, but she's holding the torch. They need her to do that so they can see. So she's complicit and colluding and involved. Around 10 p.m. on July the 8th, 2005, Tiffany Cole drives the group to the Sumner's home. Bear in mind how much planning has gone into this. Bear in mind the fact that at this point, anybody can say no. Bear in mind the fact that Tiffany Cole may have held the flashlight, but she is now driving the potential aggressors to the home of the couple who have looked after her. Cole and Jackson stay in the car, and the reason for this is they said they didn't want to be recognised, which is strange on the basis that they've already planned that they're going to kill the couple, but this is what they initially say. So Wade and Nixon then ring the Sumner's doorbell, and understandably it's late, so Reggie and Carol answer, and they're dressed in their pyjamas. They basically ask the Sumners if they can use their phone. And again, what I would say to anybody watching this is if somebody turns up at your house and asks to use your phone at night, say no. I know that's awful, but unless they are a distressed woman who looks like she might be in serious danger or a lost child, you really have to think about yourself. You might want to say, no, I'm not going to open the door to do that, but I will phone the person for you. So you can answer the need of those human beings without putting yourself at risk. Remember what we say about criminals who are organised this way. They are looking for availability and vulnerability. You open the door, you let them use your phone in your home. You are both of those things. I'm not victim blaming. I'm just saying there are things that we need to think about, which is protecting the self over being a good human being. Because they've got this incredible charitable nature, we know that because of the way they've been with Tiffany Cole, they let the strangers into their home. And that's when Wade and Nixon attack them. They overpower the couple. They rip the phone from the wall. And then Nixon even threatens them with a gun. It's a replica gun, but honestly, that would not matter. I mean, if somebody comes at you in your home, overpowers you, and then seems to have a gun, particularly in the States where guns are legal, you're going to believe that that is going to happen. You're going to believe your life is at risk. Wade then grabs Reggie around the neck and actually pushes him down into a chair. And it's at this point they basically say to both Reggie and Carol, look, we want your bank card and credit cards. I would imagine in that moment, the couple would feel like, my God, anything, please just get out of our house. And Carol at this point begins to cry, pleads with Wade and Nixon not to hurt her and her husband. Remember, they're frail. And Wade and Nixon are like, we won't hurt you. We just want your bank details. We just want access to your money. They take the couple to the spare bedroom and they then bind their hands and feet with duct tape. And this would be horrifying because when you imagine somebody in a position of power binding your arms and feet, you're going to imagine the worst case scenario. Indeed, they should, because this is happening and it's going to happen to them. But the terror that would have been in their world in that moment is just horrifying to imagine. They also get the duct tape and they wrap it over their eyes and mouths, which in itself is incredibly dangerous. There are many murders that have been committed by stopping the airways, by placing duct tape over areas like noses and mouths. And remember, we have 2 frail elderly human beings in this moment in time with health issues. So they are in danger even at this point of losing their lives. Wayne and Nixon then call Jackson and he goes in. He searches the property, looks for bank account details and financial statements because he wants to confirm the money that they have. Then they take the Sumners to the garage and they actually lock them in the boot of their own car. It's a Ford Lincoln. Just think about that for a moment. This frail couple, hands bound, feet bound, duct tape over their eyes and mouth, being forced into the boot of this Ford Lincoln. They would be desperately hoping that this was going to end, and yet suspecting that when it ends, it probably won't be good for them. This is when Jackson, Tiffany Cole, Wade and Nixon start the next brutal phase of their plan, and it is brutal. Wade and Nixon start transporting the Sumners in the boot of the car, and Tiffany Cole and Jackson follow close behind them in the hire car. Again, it's a lot of planning here, isn't there? They've clearly thought this through. Highly premeditated, remember that. They decided that if any police appeared, the plan was basically for Tiffany Cole and Jackson to purposely speed, which would distract the police away from the Sumner's car. So again, they're thinking and articulating possibilities, and they're planning for those possibilities. What happens to the Sumners in this case is the absolute stuff of horror movies. I would say the stuff of nightmares, but this beats even that. They drive them to this really remote location where they dug the holes previously in the woods. Tiffany Cole stays with the Mazda by the roadside, whilst Jackson, Wade and Nixon drive the Lincoln further into the woods. When they open the boot of the Sumner's car, somehow Carol and Reggie have managed to get the duct tape off their hands and work their way out of that duct tape, and they're holding each other and they're praying. I just want you to have that image for a minute, that they're holding each other and praying. What would be your reaction in that moment? You'd just feel empathy, wouldn't you? The acknowledgement of that fear, maybe even a flash of conscience. What are we doing? Look at this couple in each other's arms praying. But no. Jackson is so angry because the plan is that this couple have duct tape and that they are able to control them. And as far as he's concerned, Wade and Nixon haven't done a good job, so he wants them to apply more duct tape. And the reason for this is that Jackson says, I don't want to see their eyes when I kill them. That's what he says. He said, on reflection, looking back at that crime, he knew he was going to kill them, so he didn't want to look in their eyes. It's all about him. How do I make this easier for me? Snuffing the life out of this innocent couple. The three men then get the couple out of the car. They take them, bound, blindfolded, terrified, hopeless, to where they dug the hole. They literally lead them to their sites of execution. And then before they do what is absolutely horrifying that I'm going to describe shortly, Jackson manages to get the PIN numbers to the bank accounts off them. He then tells Nixon to go and wait with Tiffany Cole and also to keep an eye on her. Maybe he was worried that she might leave and inform people. I think if that were the case, he was thinking too highly of her, with respect. But obviously that separates the couple. And now he has all the information that he needs. The Sumners are absolutely collateral to their needs. Simple as that. They're not required. So Jackson pushes the Sumners into the pre-dug hole. And he and Wade then basically start to bury them. They're alive. And they start heaping the earth on top of Reggie and Carol. Can you imagine what they're going through in that moment? More and more dirt being piled on top of them, their chest compressing because the weight of the earth is becoming more and more challenging. They eventually suffocated. Slow, awful death. And the reason that we know that is because when the coroner and medical examiner looked at it, they said the cause of death was mechanical obstruction of the airways by dirt. So they were inhaling dirt. And dirt was actually found in the mouth, throat, trachea, and esophagus of both victims. And the couple were found in kneeling positions, and that would have meant the weight of the dirt on them would have compressed the diaphragm, which should have made breathing even more difficult. They would have been terrified. They couldn't defend themselves, and they couldn't escape that hole. And instead, their deaths involved them kneeling, huddled together, and hugging one another whilst they were slowly buried. It's gruesome beyond belief, isn't it? No pity shown by any of the perpetrators to them. And remember, this couple are not strangers. This couple have extended a welcome to Tiffany Cole and Jackson, who've stayed with them. And even when the two strangers, Wade and Nixon, knocked on their door, they let them into their home to use the phone. All they were guilty of was trying to help. Now, were our perpetrators traumatised? Were they guilt-ridden? Did they realise how horrific their actions were? No, they didn't. No remorse at all. Because literally immediately after the murder, they go and withdraw $1,000 from an ATM. They abandon the Sumner's car about an hour away from the murder scene. They've also wiped it down, so they're trying to be forensically sophisticated. And then the group basically drive to a hotel in the hired Mazda. At this point, Nixon, who's basically hurt his knee, remains at the hotel. But Jackson, Cole and Wade go to the Sumner's home. They're wearing gloves because they don't want to obviously leave prints. And they literally steal items that they know they'll be able to pawn. So not only have they literally buried this couple alive in a grave, they're then immediately going to get the spoils of their crime to pawn all available items like jewellery. Now, what they took was the couple's computer, jewellery, prescription medication. They could not care less about what they've done. They have no guilt. And also, there's very low sophistication at this point, because again, if you pawn items, there is a paper trail back to you, right? So they're not that bright when it comes down to plotting this kind of crime. The next day after the murder, Nixon goes to a party, and whilst he's there, he's actually sharing the Sumner's stolen medication with people there. That's when loose lips begin. He's really drunk and high, and he starts saying, guess what? I buried somebody alive, and I'm going to get $20,000. He's even flashing $20 bills around. He says he's going to buy a new car. So people are immediately drawn to this reality that there is this kid basically walking around saying, oh, by the way, I've buried somebody alive, which would be fine if the police aren't going to find somebody who's buried alive, which is obviously going to tie straight to you. It seems that the group immediately start living the high life with the victim's money. They are going around cash points every opportunity they get, and they're withdrawing thousands of dollars. That in itself, again, shows this low level of sophistication. All they're thinking about is immediacy. They're not interested in covering the tracks. They think they've got away with a perfect murder. And there are actually photos that were used and were really damning in the trial of Tiffany Cole, because they showed Jackson and Cole basically in a limousine. They had champagne, handfuls of cash with them, and they were brought in as if they were resonant of what had happened after the murders. However, in hindsight, it may well be that those pictures had been taken before the murders, when the couple initially met in their romantic setting in Myrtle Beach after he'd robbed her. So again, we're bringing that in because those pictures are very much used at the trial. Now, whilst our criminals are basically celebrating and pawning our poor victims' jewellery and items, Carol Sumner's daughter has become really concerned. So Rhonda has been trying to get in touch with her mother and can't contact her. Rhonda lives in Charleston still, but she had this really good relationship with her mum, and she would speak to her every single day. After she can't speak to her for 2 days, remember they're in frail health, she's really worried. So she gets in touch with the police and says, look, can you do a welfare check? My mum's disappeared. Rhonda then goes to her mother's house and she realises there is something not right. Something is wrong. This is not how it should be. There was food spread all around the table. Their pet dog had been left unattended, which is not something that they would ever do. Her mum's mobile phone and her day planner that she had with her all the time was still present in the house, and Reggie's cane and wheelchair was still in the house. Again, he needs that to get around. All the medications that hadn't been stolen were still there. There were latex gloves strewn around the kitchen floor, and also the tower portion of the computer was missing. Everything indicates something sinister's happened. Something is definitely wrong. And concern escalates even further when the Sumner's abandoned car is located in Sanderson, Baker County on the 12th of July. So an off-duty police officer had discovered it near his home, and he noticed that there was a description of a car that was missing and that it fitted that description. So now he's got, as far as he's concerned, the stolen car. And he sees pieces of duct tape in the car. And even more worryingly, 4 shovels in the boot. This is the point where they also connect the fact that the Sumner's bank account's being absolutely drained, regularly accessed. So they are now aware that something really bad is likely to have happened to the Sumners. And on the 12th of July, detectives learn that there are really large sums of money being withdrawn. Several ATM withdrawals have happened. Thousands of dollars have been made over the previous several days. Yet, when they look back at the Sumners' behaviour digitally, they rarely use an ATM. So not only we've got all this strange thing happening at the home, the car being stolen and found, duct tape and shovels being around, their behaviour, if it were them, has changed significantly because suddenly they're driving around using ATMs, so it does not make sense. Police then get the ATM footage and they're looking for where the withdrawals have been made. And it shows a white man using the Sumner's bank card with a Mazda sports car in the background. Like I said, Tiffany Cole, not the brightest person when it comes down to committing crimes. Also, police are immediately drawn to the fact, well, this is not Reggie Sumner. This is not an individual of 61 years of age who's frail. Because the police want to be able to keep a tab on who these individuals are and get as much information about them so they can bring them to justice, they instruct the bank to keep the account open because they need to identify who this guy is accessing the Sumner's bank account. But they didn't have to wait too long because they got a call off him. Literally. That guy that they saw at the ATM just gives them a ring. This is where you can really see psychopathy on stimulants. I mean, why would you call the police when you are a felon who is stealing money from individuals you've murdered? You would want to put distance between yourself. No, not Jackson. Jackson wants to make it clear that there are some issues with his ATM situations. So he contacts the sheriff's office, pretending to be Reggie Sumner. Very bad impression. I don't need to know Reggie Sumner's voice to know that he does not sound like a 61-year-old man when Jackson calls the police. So he calls the police and says, hey, me and my wife are in Delaware for a friend's funeral and we are fine. So now he's pretending to be Reggie and trying to act like his wife and him are just out of town for a few days, even though he sounds like a 20-odd-year-old guy and not a 61-year-old frail man. He says, yeah, the backstory to this behaviour is that some friend of mine has just said, like, oh, basically your car's missing and somebody's burgled your house. And I'm just kind of getting in contact with you because I have heard this. But the truth is, what he genuinely called those police about was because he thought that Sumner's bank card had been cancelled. So he was calling the sheriff to get the card reactivated. I know, everybody listening is like, where does Jackson live in his mythical idea of what police powers are? I mean, when I lost my card or when somebody was fortunately using it once, I didn't ring the police and go, can you cancel it? And I wouldn't have said, can you reactivate it? Because that's the bank's job. Is it just me? Is it just me? But there we have it. That's what he was thinking, that the sheriff would be able to get it reactivated. So the police ask, what's the name of the airport that you've flown from and also the town in Delaware that you're staying? Jackson, thinking on his feet, went, this one. And he gave them a town that didn't exist. And he also gave them an airport that only handled cargo flights.
We tried to go to the ATM today. That's when it is saying unable to process and gave me the receipt and said contact the bank. I mean, I'm a diabetic and she's got cancer and everything, and we take like a lot of medication.
Now, during the call, he does give some personal information about Reggie. He says that he has diabetes, and he also mentions his wife cancer, and he explains that they need to access their cash. And when they told the sheriff this, the sheriff was obviously completely convinced and was like, absolutely, I will definitely get your card reactivated. It won't be a problem. We've got direct links with God and the bank. And by the way, the imaginary town that you're living in, enjoy it. No, that didn't happen. Obviously, it was very clear to the sheriff that he wasn't dealing with 61-year-old Reggie Sumner. So the sheriff then says, okay, let me speak to Carol. So Jackson magically brings in Carol, who is obviously Tiffany Cole. And they carry on this ridiculous ruse.
Is this Carol?
Yes, sir, it is.
You doing all right?
Mm-hmm. Just really tired.
I understand. I understand that you may have some health problems.
Mm-hmm. Cancer.
Cancer?
And liver.
Because of this call, the police were also able to use mobile triangulation, which meant that they ultimately traced the call to Jackson's phone. So again, not forensically sophisticated. And the police were also able to establish from phone records the hire car firm from where the Mazda sports car had been rented. And then they called the rental company, and you will not be surprised to note, they say, oh, Tiffany Cole rented this Mazda. And also, it's overdue for return. So they're like, not only are you ringing about a car that, yes, we rented out, Tiffany Cole hasn't brought it back, can you please bring it back for us? They, as a rental company, have also got one of the most impressive things that you would have if you had cars that were rented out to strangers, GPS tracking, which means not only did they know where it is, they know exactly where that car's been. That includes the location nearby the Sumner's home in Jacksonville on the evening of July the 8th. And a friend and neighbour of the Sumners can also testify that they spotted a silver Mazda parked at the Sumner's house the same night. Other locations include, will you be surprised? All the ATMs where they've been taking the money out using the Sumner's bank cards. So by identifying the ATMs where the Sumner's bank account had been accessed, they were also able to establish that Cole and Jackson were in South Carolina. The net is closing in. On the 14th of July, Cole, Jackson and Wade are arrested in a motel in Charleston. They've booked out 2 rooms in Cole's name, and in the car they find driver's licenses, they find credit cards, checkbooks, mail and a coin collection belonging to the Sumners. They also discover papers detailing the Sumners' online passwords, social security numbers and birth dates. So, bang, 2 rights, buddy. Simple as that. Now, during the interrogation with the police, what I will be honest about is the fact that Cole absolutely admits to her role in it. She says she is involved in the abduction, she is involved in the robbery, and she is involved in the murder. But she also says, look, even though I was involved, it was basically Jackson who created this situation. He was the mastermind, and all I did was I went ahead with it because I was scared of him. We also know, as previously mentioned, that she did tend to have a penchant for dominant, abusive people. So I'm not even saying that she wasn't fearful of him to some degree. Nonetheless, that does not mitigate her behaviour. She even admits that she became Carol Sumner on the phone call. Again, she says it's because Jackson made me do it. She also says that even though, yes, she was there when all of this happened, she really didn't know that the Sumners were in the boot of the car during the journey from the Sumners' home to where they were murdered. It was only when she overheard Jackson speaking to Nixon and to Wade that she realises that's happened. And she said she didn't know at that point whether the Sumners were even alive or dead. She actually presumed on that journey they were already dead, they'd been killed. Now, during the interrogation, she also brings Nixon into the picture. This is the first time that the police are even aware that there's a 4th person involved. So Nixon then gets arrested at his home in McClenny, literally within moments of that information being passed on. And he is so cooperative. He is one of those individuals who just instantly folds. He tells them everything they need to know. He even takes the police to the spot that they've been buried and shows them where the essential tomb is. So it doesn't take long at all for the police to find the victims in that grave. Nixon again says, look, I genuinely didn't know that I was being involved in a murder. I thought this was a robbery. I didn't realise that the hole that we dug was to be a grave. I just thought things were going to be put in there that maybe was removed from the crime, and that would be somewhere that we could return to. It wasn't at any point a place that I thought people were going to be murdered. Now, Jackson doesn't know this is happening. He is completely unaware of Nixon's arrest, and even more unaware of the cooperation that he's giving authorities. He speaks to his grandmother. He has this phone call with her, and she tells him.
He took him to the grave site and everything.
Oh my God, man. He took him to the... Are you kidding me?
It's right here in today's paper. It's
Bruce
right
told where the spot was at.
Yes, dear.
Bruce just killed us all.
I often look at how we create people. I know that psychopaths probably have DNA, temperament-based issues when they're born. I know that some of them get head injuries. I know that some of them have issues between the ventromedial, prefrontal cortex. I appreciate this is the case, but also, who brings you up matters, right? In the majority of cases, the vast majority. And the fact that his grandmother actually seems annoyed that Nixon has told the truth. So basically, Jackson's grandma is quite put out that Nixon has done this. It kind of resonates with me that if that's your grandma and she's actually annoyed with the person who's admitted the truth and is more protective of you, the person who's gone out and murdered innocent people, there is an issue, isn't there? You want to bring up a narcissist, don't give them any responsibility, treat them like they're innocent when they're not, and be annoyed with the victims when they come forward and say things, or in this case, where another perpetrator admits guilt. As far as I'm concerned, that says one thing. Clearly, being an immoral, inhuman animal runs in the Jackson family. Take that as a quote from me. Jackson at this point is completely panicked, and he actually uses the phrase,
Bruce just killed us all.
now, due to the nature of these offences, the prosecution sought the death penalty against Cole, Jackson and Wade. Why? It was premeditated. And it wasn't just premeditated, it was premeditated murder for financial gain. Bruce Nixon does carry on throughout this case cooperating with authorities. He acts as a prosecution witness at his co-defendants' trials, which is obviously something that would be terrifying for him, but also gives us a little bit of insight into Bruce Nixon's mindset, which is one of conscience and guilt. I also would bring in the fact that he probably wants a lighter sentence, certainly wouldn't want to be put to death. So there is also a gain in him doing this. Jackson tries throughout this to mitigate his part in the offence. He says, look, I was involved, but it was never about murder. It was always about money. I didn't even know that anyone was going to get hurt. He properly is like a blabbermouth. There is nothing more amusing for me than watching a man or a woman who thinks that they're so bright try to talk themselves out of a situation only to seem completely without compassion, empathy and understanding about the gravity of the offence, to try to make themselves seem completely innocent, even when all of the weight of evidence and everything that everybody's saying is clearly demonstrating they are fully responsible, but they just genuinely believe, oh, if I just keep speaking, it will be fine. It is with him that classic sentence, if his lips are moving, he's lying. Simple as that. So he goes on trial first, basically. He faces 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of armed kidnapping, and 2 counts of armed robbery. The jury listened to him and are like, you know what? I think he might be telling the truth, because this guy seems like a really honest author. That didn't happen. They just thought he was completely guilty on every single count, and they're so aware of that that they decide, you're going to die. So they sentence him to death on the 29th of August 2007. Wade is the next person who faces trial, and he gets the same charges. Again, found guilty, sentenced to death on the 4th of March 2008. This is a bit of a side note, but just to put this in context of weirdness, he actually gets into a letter correspondence during all of this time on death row with this French woman, and they ultimately get married and have a child. Just what I'd be looking for in a partner. If you're looking at the Tinder profile on that one, a penchant with shovels. You wouldn't want him to get involved with your gardening, would you? Sorry, is it just me? What is wrong with people? What is wrong with people? I mean, to be fair, somebody did marry Richard Ramirez, and she had an IQ of like 160. So that, by logic, would mean that you wouldn't get married to somebody like the Night Stalker. So who knows? Maybe you just want to have somebody who's faithful, and think if they're locked up, you're never going to be in a situation where they can leave you. That's not true either. There are several cases where a man has got married in prison to a woman outside of prison, and then he's had an affair with somebody else through writing to them and got divorced and married them. I've read about it. Just saying. Whole heap of weird. Whole heap of weird. Don't do it, kids. Like, you don't have to not write to people in prison. There are lots of really nice people in prison who just have had bad experiences. But when it comes down to murderers on death row, I'm just saying, not the best as far as dating profiles go. Also, just again, side note, conjugal visits aren't permitted for death row inmates. How did it happen? How did it happen? We're thinking Ted Bundy here, aren't we? Do people just turn a blind eye when that kind of stuff happens in visits? Or was she just canny? It was like, it's totally your baby. And he's like, I'm sure we haven't even had sex. It's your baby. Great, it's my baby. I don't know. Could be either of those things, but bizarre. Now, Nixon avoids the death penalty, and the reason for that is he turns state's evidence and he testifies against his co-accused. He pleads guilty to second-degree murder, and he's sentenced to 45 years in prison, so he does not get off easy by any stretch of the imagination. You think about in the UK, people can go down for life and be out within 10 years without a problem. So there are very different constructs around what we see as a life sentence, dependent on country. Now, Tiffany Cole goes on trial in October 2007. At this point, she has been assessed by court psychiatrists, and they have already identified that she had some significant mental health issues. First of all, she's drug and alcohol dependent, which means that she probably isn't interpreting the world around her in a way that she should, and she's probably not making the best decisions, so that's important. We also find out that she suffers from really chronic depression. She has a personality disorder based around masochistic behaviour. The way that they explore that is her personality is one that leads her to pursue things in life that cause her problems. So she's masochistic towards herself. Tiffany Cole also brings in that she has been sexually molested by her natural dad for 2 years, and she said that started when she was 16. She also says, look, I can evidence this because I told my mum, and my mum did not believe me. And that in itself completely destroyed her self-esteem and trust in others. I'm going to acknowledge that if that is the case, and Tiffany Cole told her biological mother that she was being sexually molested by her biological father and her mother did nothing, shame on her. Shame on her mother. Because it doesn't matter where we are with Tiffany Cole. If a child tells you that they've been raped by a parent, your duty and job as a parent is to believe them firstly and to do something about it secondly. Otherwise, we're in for a whole heap of issues where that individual is. Sense of worth wise, sense of self-esteem wise, and sense of self-value wise. It's as simple as that. And also, if you can't trust the two people who are meant to be bringing you up, then who can you trust in life, right? She also claims that Jackson had made her carry out the crime. She never realised that anyone was going to get hurt, and that as far as she was concerned, she was an innocent bystander in an articulation of a crime that she had little planning with him. I'm going to be honest, the jury did not believe those events at all. They had this week-long trial and they struggled to even wrap their heads around what the mitigation was there, because from what they had seen, she had been involved in all of the planning and she had been present at the murders and she had gone out and spent money afterwards and parted. It only took them 90 minutes deliberation, and in that 90 minutes they find her completely guilty of first-degree murder and the kidnapping of Reggie and Carol Sumner. As far as they're concerned, she was the key. The crime would never have happened if she had not been involved. The chain of causation lies at Tiffany Cole's door. It was she who was connected to the Sumners. it was she who allowed them all to take full advantage of the trust that the Sumners had in her. On March the 6th, 2008, she's sentenced to death, a majority of 9-3. And this is really rare. And to put this in context, she's the only female on Florida's death row at the time. The only female. That's how rare it is. Some will say that that's because we treat men more unfairly, because we don't want to see women put to death. Others will say, no, this is to do with the fact that women doing such reprehensible, heinous crimes are incredibly rare, and that's why they don't end up on death row. Take either of those. The point is, this is where we end up. She's the only female on death row at the time of the sentencing. 2010, she appeals because, again, she's peddling this belief that she only thought it was a theft. She didn't know it was going to be a murder. She said that she knew nothing about the plans, nothing about the robbery, nothing about the abduction and murder. And she also notes again that as far as she was concerned, she didn't know the Sumners were in the boot of the car. The court do accept at this point that, okay, maybe you didn't know that Carol and Reggie were going to be buried alive. So you didn't acknowledge that part of it. So, of course, the heinous, atrocious, cruel, aggravating factor should not necessarily be applied to that when sentencing her. But again, the appeal court don't believe her. They feel that those remaining aggravating factors still warranted the death penalty. And these factors that they explored to see whether she could remain on death row included homicide committed during the commission of a kidnapping, homicide committed in a cold, calculated and premeditated manner, homicide committed for financial gain, homicide committed to avoid arrest. The victims were also incredibly vulnerable because of their advanced age and their disability. So they are really solid reasons why Tiffany Cole, as far as they were concerned, were on death row. Now, there also are mitigating factors. Let's acknowledge that. She had had no significant criminal record, although we know she was dealing loads of drugs, which is criminal activity, but okay, she hadn't been in trouble for crimes. While she was in custody, she had model behaviour. She did show remorse for her actions, and she even wrote letters to the victims' families asking them for their forgiveness. Not sure they're going to give her. Don't think they did, from what I know. They were like, yeah, screw you. You killed our relatives in a heinous way. I really don't care about forgiving you. Jog on. Anyway, when they looked at these particular balances and explored mitigation versus aggravation, they said, look, this does not outweigh the aggravating factors. And at this point, she's sent to Lowell Correctional Institution to await execution. Now, in spite of all this, following a US Supreme Court's decision in 2016 in a case of Hearst versus Florida, it was decided that non-unanimous death penalty verdicts were ruled unconstitutional. So the fact that we have a 9-3, 9 being pro Tiffany Cole being put to death, 3 being against it, it's now ruled as unconstitutional. Subsequently, in 2017, Florida Supreme Court ordered new sentencing hearings for Cole, Jackson and Wade. Whether they will ultimately be executed, only time's going to tell. What we do know is that Reggie and Carol's death is an absolute tragedy. They were a loving couple. They were a loving couple separated by 40 years who rediscovered each other late in their life and who were finally able to experience happiness. They'd shown hospitality, kindness, compassion to their killers. And you think about that saying, it's one that my brother often uses when we're talking about certain things from our past, and he will often say, a good deed never goes unpunished. It's his saying with me, that often we'll do things and then people will kick you in the teeth and it's like, I was doing something good and the response is something really bad happens. But that certainly fits this couple. Currently, Cole remains on death row. She's one of 51 women currently on death row in the USA. She's one of 3 women on Florida's death row. Just one of 3. Shocking, really, isn't it, when you think about that, compared to men? Just one of 3 in Florida who's on death row. Now, whether she was just a cog in a wheel manipulated by Jackson or a willing participant to one of the most brutal murders that I think I've ever heard about, we're never going to know. So when all is said and done in this case, Tiffany Cole still has the power and potential, if she does get that sentence appealed again, to maybe have her sentence from death to be made into a life sentence instead. Who knows? I imagine for Reggie and Carol's family, that would be cold justice because of the fact that they want retribution. They want her life snuffed out because she did the same to their loved ones. And we all have different opinions, don't we, on whether people deserve the death sentence. In the UK, we don't have it. But certainly when you think about the torture, the financial incentive and reasoning behind this murder, and just the absolute lack of empathy and compassion shown a couple who showed people around them just that, empathy and compassion, just chill you to the bone. I have watched Tiffany Cole talking about wanting to be allowed a life sentence, and she believes that she does. She doesn't believe in death, she believes in hope. It's quite compelling to watch her talk about this because you can see that as much as she believes that she deserves that kind of forgiveness, there's something lacking in her reality, understanding, and consequence of the actions that she carried out. Like I said, it's pretty insane to be one of just 3 people on Florida death row as a female. It says something pretty heinous about the crimes that you carried out to get that kind of sentence. I hope you found that interesting. Join me next time for another true crime with me, Emma Kenny. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed, please. It helps me. Comment, give me a like. I love it all. And those of you following me on Patreon, I'll be uploading some bits and pieces to let you know more about the merch. Just to remind you, thank you for all your support. Thank you everybody who comes to my channel supporting me. I adore you all. Nearly at 70,000 subs, which is massive for me. I just thought it'd be like me and 9 other people or so just going, nice one, Em. Thanks for that. But you've made it brilliant. I appreciate every single one of you. Take care and see you soon.